A brief foreword before we go into this. I've been having just random cough attacks, so I'm going to try not to, obviously, but if I ever, if you see the video kind of stutter or whatever, that's because I've tried to edit out a cough attack. So, this was a bit of a test. We've streamed almost every Telltale game on camera. We never reviewed any, and I was really curious about whether or not a review format would work. So we did the same thing we did with Sith Warrior over in Tor. We picked one of the best outcomes, one of the best classes, and one of the best stories, and tested the format with that. If it's going to work for that, there's a decent chance it'll work for other stuff too. It worked. The game scored incredibly well, of course. And yeah, here we are. So, game good, everything good. Cool. We're cool. But I should probably mention that this is my favorite Telltale game, and for good reason. What I should also probably mention is that this is astonishing that this game is this good. So Telltale got big from Walking Dead Season 1. That was kind of their smash success. They'd been doing games before that, but that really put them on the map and kind of honestly codified the format of games, because every Telltale game that came out after Walking Dead Season 1 follows the same overall formula, for good and for bad. One of the first things that I want to mention about that is I actually like the Telltale formula quite a lot. It is a linear story. You're on one road, okay? But you can choose the lane you drive in. This is an analogy given by one of the viewers at the time. I forget who, please forgive me. But, but it works. It's similar to Witcher 3 in a weird way. You always play as Geralt, but you can decide which flavor of Geralt you play. And it's the same concept. You decide which particular lane you're driving down the road on. I'm with that. I enjoy that, as long as the story is good. And they do have to do a lot of things to make this work. There has to be good moments, good characters, good voice acting, good storyboarding. And surprisingly, they nail all of those in this game in particular. Now, every Telltale game has had a couple of issues and a couple of flaws. One of the big Telltale problems is drama, where there's a scene where there's just some artificial drama, because we have to have some drama. But we didn't have that this time around. Another Telltale commonality is when you have a non-choice. This is when, to not spoil anything, but to use a completely made-up example. Let's say we're going through, and I don't have anything on my desk to do this with. So the brush is like, all right, I'm going to go here with you. And the water bottle, I'm working with what I got, is like, I'm going to go with you too. But then you have to choose between these people, and the one you don't choose will die. But then what tends to happen is before the episode is even over, the one that you didn't choose also dies towards the end, whoever it is. So if you choose this person to live, they go over here and they die. And you choose this person, they go over here and they die. It's a non-choice. It invalidates the choice, and all it does is change a few minor things. What I'm trying to say here, because you're probably thinking, wait, I thought you don't mind the non-branching. What I don't mind, what I enjoy, is choosing the flavor of the story I'm watching. What I do not appreciate is being lied to about the fact that it's a branching narrative when it's not. Now, yes, I know some Telltale games have had actually branching narrative, but even that was something they were only beginning to get into by the end of their career there, before their incredibly terrible management practices had the entire company shut down in such a horrifically awesome way. Awesome? That's the wrong word. Awe-inspiring? Like, it was shocking how much that company fell apart. But I should probably tie that back into this game, because their management practices were truly terrible. Now, this is not exactly unusual in any company ever, but especially amongst game developers. Usually what you have is a lot of talented staff and bungling idiots who have no idea what they're doing. See CD Projekt Red and the aforementioned Witcher 3. So, they had this game, and they were working on it, and then because they were being so successful and because everything was going awesome, they got a whole bunch of other IPs, and they really, really wanted to focus on this other game. It's going to be their best game ever, their hottest game ever. They're going to make a Game of Thrones Telltale. Yeah. I did a little looking up before this. I haven't even played the Game of Thrones Telltale, and never will, but that was usually at the bottom of most people's preference lists with regards to Telltale. Now, that doesn't mean it's a bad game, but it does mean it was not a particularly good game. And it didn't exactly sell well either. But let's be honest, Telltale games very rarely sell well. This is a niche game, and niche games don't have blockbuster sales figures, which was another flaw of the management. But I'm getting off topic. The game that I'm covering today, Tales from the Borderlands, also didn't sell well, which is a shame, because it's amazing. I was really hoping this one had sold well, because that would complete the analogy. If you're paying any kind of attention, if you watched this show before, you've heard me say almost this exact same story before. Let me repeat it for you in case you missed it. Oh, they want to do something with animals and make it kind of that's never going to work. You know what? We've got this much bigger period piece. It's going to be hitting on the American Indians and the first, landing, and it's going to be fantastic. We're going to have John Smith's story. It's going to be wonderful, and all the time and all the attention and all the budget and all the people all left Lion King to go work on Pocahontas, and we saw how that turned out. This is what I call a Star Wars. We just talked about this with Resident Evil 4. But for a brief refresher, in case you didn't see that video or any of the other videos I've talked about it in, because people keep asking me to reiterate my terms, because blah, 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 because not everyone... I've been asked many times to not assume that people watch all of my work, because I produce an absolutely ridiculous amount of work every week. But a Jurassic Park is a game workbook, movie show, whatever, that has all the pieces in place, and all the talents there, and all the supports there, and it clicks, right? Star Wars is when they have none of that, and you look at the behind the scenes and you're like, how is this ever going to be anything? Like, it just kind of, I don't want to say it bungled its way into success. It's more like no one could have really predicted it was going to be as successful as it was, unless they were, particularly talented or particularly, aware of the situation, because it looks like it's going to fail. Just like Lion King. Just like Tales from the Borderlands. This game started off with almost the entire main staff. They put out episode 1. Then they ripped away the main writer and most of the rest of the writing team for episode 2. By the way, there was a gargantuan gap. This game came out over the course of over a year. If you don't understand why that's significant, the Telltale formula is usually, here's episode 1, and like 1 or 2 months later, here's episode 2, here's episode 3, here's episode 4, here's episode 5. And that's their format. And it's worked well for them for quite a while, actually. But with Telltale from the Borderlands, it was more like, here's episode 1, and then there was, I think, a 5-month break, and then episode 2, and then there was another 5-month break. This thing took forever, because the studio kept pulling support away from it. Staff, money, time. And that ineffable thing I refer to as weight. This game had almost no weight behind it at all. Somehow, this game turned out to be fantastic. Now, I have a theory. A lore theory. I think that what ended up happening is the people who were left, who spent most of episode 3 in what is effectively a filler episode, trying to rejigger and figure out what they were doing, and said, okay, this is what we've got. And they got creative. They looked at what they had, they looked at what they could do. A lot of episode 4 and episode 5's seams show, if you're really paying attention, the giant boss fight at the end of episode 5 is actually kind of lackluster. It really literally looks like a couple of action figures. There's no weight to the animation. It doesn't feel like they're giant things. There's huge and constant issues with scale. Some of the death animations don't even exist for some of the fail states, because these games usually have that kind of thing. There's a lot of things where it's clear that they were just trying to make what they could, but what they did was they really polished what they had, what they knew they could do, to an absolute shine. One of my favorite examples of this is actually in episode 4. How many of you who are familiar with this game know about the finger gun fight scene? That scene came about because they wanted to have a big action sequence, and they didn't have the time, weight, money, budget, personnel to do a proper action scene. So they made do. They got creative. Now, I don't want to oversell this, because the attitude of, oh, just make do with less, is arguably part of why management tends to be terrible about these things, and just kind of forces people to live with less. But I do want to give credit and praise to the people who actually did make an amazing game under very strenuous circumstances. It's very clear, and this is again my theory, that they are very talented, very passionate people who really poured their souls into this. Allow me to say this as bluntly as I can. This is the best Borderlands game I've ever played. Oh, don't mistake me, Borderlands 2 and pre-sequel and 3 absolutely smash it in the gameplay category, but this game sold me on the Borderlands franchise. I'd only played 1 and a bit of 2 prior to this, and I wasn't really into it. Then I played this game. Then I went back and finished 2 and played all the way through pre-sequel, and I am currently on a playthrough going through 3 with my friends. And all of that was because of this game. The odds that this video will ever be seen by anybody who worked on this game is non-existent because I'm a tiny little speck on the internet that nobody cares about. But in the off chance you happen to be seeing this, you're awesome. You did a great job with this game, and I wanted to give that special praise. One of the hallmarks of these games is moments. In fact, I would say moments and characters are the two big ones. Getting across a moment takes everything. It's cooking. It doesn't matter if you have a really good chunk of meat. If you don't add the right seasoning, cook it in the right material, in the right way, for the right period of time. All the ingredients, all the chemistry that goes into cooking a good meal has to be there. That's moments. So there's no cheat, right? There's no quick and easy answer to say this is exactly how you make a great moment. The fact that this game has so many great moments, I'm not even going to count them right now, says so much about how much effort and work was being put into making sure that all of those ingredients popped. Now, I could gush about the voice acting, I could gush about the voice direction, I could gush about the usage of animations, I could gush about the sequencing. But the thing I really want to point out, and this is the one that really surprised me, is the storyboarding. I talk about this semi-frequently, usually only when it's really good or really bad. Storyboarding is how you block what happens. It usually applies with action sequences, but it can apply in any scene, since any scene needs to be storyboarded. You have to decide who is where and why. That's storyboarding in the simplest way to put it. See, this person, let's go back to our terrible examples. So we got two characters talking. We have a scene with two characters talking. So if the two characters just do this and talk to each other, that's visually boring. A lot of people do the over-the-shoulder method. Some people will have them walking around and doing stuff. And if they're walking around doing stuff, it's like, okay, we want him to walk over here. So the camera's going to be looking across this person. Let me actually do it. So the camera's going to be looking across this person right here. And so we're going to see, it's kind of an over-the-shoulder thing, but what's going to happen is as the conversation turns and as this person starts to get more of a point against this person, we're going to do this, and the camera's going to kind of shift over here as they're walking across the room. And now they're far more distant, and it looks like they're talking across from each other. Even though in reality they're actually the same distance from each other, from the camera's perspective now they seem much more distant now that the conversation is going a different way. That's storyboarding, right? It's incredibly important, and it's a very underutilized thing when it comes to video games, in my opinion. The storyboarding in this game is excellent. At all times, they're clearly thinking about who should be what and where with regards to the cameras. This is especially impressive for the action sequences. Right at the beginning, there's this big sequence where Loaderbot, one of the best characters in the game, is fighting off all these bandits. And they're like, okay, I got this, and here, and he's going to go over here, and this is going to go over here. But meanwhile, this person's over here, so now that we've landed over here, this person's going to come over here, and it's going to go like this, and go here, and that goes down, and now we go this way, but then we go over, and then that, and then they go off this way at the end. And it just does this whole thing, right? This is really well done. Whoever does their storyboards, because usually they literally have, that's why it's called, they literally have boards and they draw out rough sketches of what the scenes are going to be, did an absolutely excellent job. The aforementioned finger gun scene is a fantastic example of that as well. They also really nailed a lot of the tone. Oh, sure, there's some humor and there's some wacky and there's some zany, but one of the things that this game does best, and I know I've talked about this before, is it is the perspective of the ants in the land of the giants. Over in Forgotten Realms, I don't actually know if this is true in 5th edition, but back in 3.5, there was a concept called the level 0 character. The level 0, so the idea was, you start D&D at level 1, right? But the idea was you work up to level 1, in lore, in character. So most of those NPCs wandering around were level 0. In some cases, there were NPC classes, and those NPC classes had substantially worse stats than PC classes, and they could level up in those. So, for example, you could be like level 0.5 equivalent or something, right? But the point is, the level 0 is the nobody. They don't really have any great skills. They don't have good stats. They've got nothing going for them. It is exceptionally difficult to write a story that's interesting and engaging from the perspective of a level 0 character which actually has stakes and plot, and even changes the status quo of the setting in question, with the destruction of Helios, as well as a couple other minor things like the final death of Handsome Jack. And yet, we manage that in this game, because we're playing level 0 nobodies. The only one of any significance in our party is Athena, and she is a PC, and she's actually decent, I'd say kind of middle tier-ish, as far as the Vault Hunters go. But nevertheless, that perspective is always there. It continues all the way up to and including Chapter 5, honestly, or Episode 5, excuse me. But probably my favorite moment about the perspective thing is there's this moment where they're flying up in the caravan into space, getting to the Helios, and they look out and they could see the planet below them. And they're just, and Fiona and Sasha are just kind of freaking out about it a little bit because, of course they are. They're ants. They've always wanted to leave the planet to go somewhere else, and yet what they're seeing is the reality of it. It's just hitting them in the face. Of course it is. Why wouldn't it? This perspective thing is a constant theme throughout the course of the work. Another interesting thing is, of course, the theme of who we choose to be versus who we were raised to be. Fiona and Felix is an obvious example. So obvious I don't even feel the need to comment on it beyond simply saying that I love Felix's line about how Fiona should get out of the con business. Because even though she's good at it, she deserves better. And I agree. And I'm really upset that she's not in Borderlands 3. But Rhys is slightly more of an interesting example. Rhys is a loser who is a nobody, who is kind of geeky and not really all that funny. He also doesn't have a lot of self-confidence. And, well, there's some issues there, right? The most obvious comparison for Rhys is Jack himself. But what's really interesting to me is the two are near identical with one critical component changed. Rhys is Jack, except not a psychopath. I know, that's kind of a large-scale thing, but hear me out for a moment. I have a concept I call Cisco versus Justice Lord. Let me explain that briefly. A Cisco is a character who will do a horrible thing and feel awful about it. They know that it's what has to happen. They know that it must be done, and it's a burden. It is a poison to their soul. A Justice Lord will do the exact same act and not be bothered about it at all. I mean, why would they? It was the correct choice. What they did made things better. Why would I feel bad about that? And you see the distinction between the two. Jack is absolutely a Justice Lord. Now, there's another niggle there, but the truth is Jack is someone who, at several points in his character arc, was actually trying to do horrible things to make things better. He is quite honest several times while he's manipulating Rhys throughout this game, and we see a good insight into his character as he laments and admits, well, that's just kind of life. And that's his attitude, at least at this point in time. It's just kind of life. There's no reason to cry over it because it's just something that happens. Meanwhile, Rhys is someone who is absolutely burdened with every choice and every failure he makes to the point where it just kind of weighs him down. Doesn't stop him, it's worth noting. Why would it? This contrast is thrown into the game constantly, pretty much from episode 2 onwards, from when Jack enters the narrative up till episode 5, where he leaves it. But my favorite comparison between this is when Jack dies. Because Jack opens up honestly and truthfully to Rhys to manipulate him, which says a lot about the kind of person he is. But while he's doing this, and while he's saying this, he finally goes ahead and just takes, he jacks himself back into Rhys's brain, takes over the cybernetic arm, and goes to choke him. And he says several things, including, this is what a real hero does. This is what real sacrifice means. This is what real determination is. During this scene, Rhys rips his arm off so that Jack can no longer kill him. And then Jack just starts saying, okay, well, that's cool. And he starts giving this whole speech about how he can take as much time as he wants to finally, eventually kill Rhys. And then Rhys takes a glass shard and starts carving out his own cybernetics. Like a hero who knows sacrifice, who understands determination would do. Rhys is the successful Jack. I know, Borderlands 3, but I stand by my statement. The mere fact that he is willing to do all this says a lot, of course, and he's not the only one who would. But between the giant of Jack and the ant of Rhys, it is the ant that wins out this contest, purely because he was willing to go farther. And, well, if we're being honest with ourselves, he wasn't hampered by one of Jack's biggest flaws, the aforementioned psychopathy. Jack is an interesting character in the sense that he is a mess of contradictions. He's orderly and extremely chaotic at the same time. He likes to just mess with people and play with people, and he also legitimately enjoys killing people for no big reason, because he thinks there's nothing really wrong with it. He actually, the reason I call him psychopath instead of sociopath, fictional terms, not real life terms, of course, is in fiction, a sociopath is someone who's just disconnected from the emotions. They don't feel anything. They don't understand. There's no empathy. A psychopath is someone who enjoys it, who actually derives pleasure from causing harm and pain and death to others. And that is definitely Jack. He gets into it. He actually likes killing and destroying it. He thinks it's funny. And, well, Reese doesn't have that. Now, you could argue whether Jack always had that or not. That's a big debate, and honestly, that belongs in the pre-sequel video, which we've actually already done. But point being, this game throws that into stark relief. Those contrasts. The fact that he has so many things at the same time. He is crazy, but he's very well composed. He is extremely long-term planner, and yet will constantly hamper his own plans for short-term gain. Almost every time he is defeated, he kind of defeats himself, which is funny, because that's the same thing that happened in Borderlands 2. Either way, when we look at this game, we see a huge insight, and there's probably a reason I've spent so much of this rumination talking about a character who's actually dead. It's because he is, in many ways, one of the pivotal characters. There's a reason why in the thumbnail for this, I chose Jack to be at the very center of the picture. It's because he is, well, he's not the main protagonist, that would actually be Loaderbot, or the two main characters, that would be Fiona and Reese. He is the crux, the apex around which everything else revolves throughout the course of the plot. All of this stuff, good and bad, happens because of him. There's an old saying, that which does not kill me makes me stronger. That saying is a load of bull. That which does not kill me does not make me stronger. I make me stronger by refusing to let it kill me. And that is Reese and arguably Fiona, but I'm going to focus on Reese for right now, in a nutshell. He refuses to allow Jack to kill him. And he makes himself stronger to do it. And that's why Jack comes out on, why Jack comes out on bottom, why Jack dies, Crush, and why Reese comes out on top. One of the things I love most about Tales from the Borderlands is it takes characters from the main series and arguably does them better. Oh god, I suddenly can't think of her name. Athena's girlfriend, I can't think of her name, the mechanic, is a good example of this. But honestly, probably the best example of this is Scooter. Scooter's not bad, but he's kind of skeezy and kind of weird. Tales from the Borderlands took him into just this adorkable character. Just made him lovable. Just the guy you just want to hug, right? That's even before he has his big scene where he sacrifices himself for the good of the party. And it's just, he's so affable about the whole thing. He's so easygoing and he's so positive, and it's funny because this is in the Borderlands setting in which people going crazy because of severe insanity and violence is a normal thing. The distended wackiness of the setting is built into it, inspired by things such as Fallout, for example, something that would later continue in Outer Worlds, to use another parallel. And yet, Tales from the Borderlands bothers to put these extremely positive characters in it, almost entirely to help center the story, I think. This is just my opinion. I don't know why they did it. But Scooter is only one example of this. Gordy's is arguably a better example of this, and so is Loaderbot, for that matter. All three of these characters are nearly universally positive influences on the game. They are like morality cores for the game, right? Gordy's is just adorable. Oh my god, I just want to hug her. Ashley Johnson voices Gordy's. I remember that one because she's actually one of my favorite actresses, and I don't see her in a lot of things. But whenever I hear her, I guess hear her, not see her, she does a really, really good job. She can manage a good gradient and a good series of tones. And she does an excellent job as the just incredibly, unabashedly innocent Gordy's. At no point does even a shred of sarcasm or bitterness or any other things that we would consider more negative emotions come out in her tone. She is just going through it the whole time. Even when she's saying something bad, she's not saying with a it's more like, oh, well, we're all probably going to die now, so that's not good. Yeah, I love the performance. And so Scooter and Gordy's, and Loaderbot. As much as I say Jack is the axis, they're kind of the weights on which the entire story is sitting upon, those three characters. And then, of course, we have Fiona. I said I'd get to her. Weirdly enough, Fiona, even though she is voiced by the brilliant Laura Bailey, doesn't have as much of an arc to her, per se. The most obvious arc is her getting used to the idea of leveling up, becoming an adventurer, becoming a vault hunter, as the terminology goes. But part of her arc also has to do with her being more than just a con woman. That's really what it boils down to. Because she has lied and cheated and manipulated her way through everyone and everything. Only been close to 2 people prior to the game's events. The idea of her being willing to and accepting opening up to others is the dominant arc that she goes through. It's funny because very early on, Reese already has that. He's got Vaughn and Yvette, and we'll talk about her in a second. And so he already understands that value of friendship, teamwork, and the tight-knit working together thing. And so when he gets an opportunity to work with someone, he almost always takes it, because that's just his leaning. Note this does not make him the opposite of Fiona, rather the inverse. Because Fiona will absolutely work with you by manipulating you and treating and working around you and not really caring about you. And so the two of them both kind of come to the same overall position, the team concept, power of friendship, etc., but it does it very, very well and very smoothly. And a lot of how it goes depends on you, because you decide the lane you play through. Vaughn, for example, can be just this amazing bro character, pun intended, or I guess joke intended. Reference? We'll go with reference. Reference intended. But Vaughn is also someone who, how close you are to him and how much you trust him and how much he's there for you, kind of depends on you. He is nevertheless an awesome friend character. He is someone who has got your back. And in pretty much every circumstance where that happens, he has got your back. My favorite example of this is in episode 3. So I mentioned episode 3 is a little bit of a filler arc. That's fine. Filler can serve a purpose. One of the most important things a filler arc can do is it can develop things. I actually just talked about this with Resident Evil 4. And in this case, what it does is it helps to define the connections between characters, which is an important thing as well. So the connection between Vaughn and Reese is further defined because Vaughn, without hesitation, leaps onto the backs of an extremely dangerous crime lord, just to try and save Reese, without even really thinking about it, because of course he's got his back. Similarly, episode 3 also develops more Fiona's connection to Athena, Sasha's connection to Reese, ship, etc., etc. It's okay, they end up together in Borderlands 3, so it's cool. It's canon. I mentioned Yvette. Yvette is probably the biggest, we'll call her the biggest casualty of the change in writers, because she, unlike some other characters, is actually written differently, and it shows. She has 3 characters throughout the course of the work, and if she was actually 3 separate characters, and, they just bounce between the different characters, that would have probably actually worked better for me. Instead, it feels like they wanted to reuse the assets, as in, the model, as well as the skeleton, the framework, and the animations, and, of course, the actress. So they just kind of used Yvette because they were limited in what they could do. But even though the new writers managed some really excellent stuff with the characters that were left to them by the old writers, I think that Yvette is an exception there. What is not an exception is Vasquez. Now, this is a funny one because they got Patrick Warburton to play Vasquez, and he's he's got that kind of warm, affable kind of tone. Kronk, But he does a really weirdly good job of portraying the most evil character in the game. And I say that without hyperbole. In a game that includes handsome Jack, who is a charismatic person with a very complex, multi-layered character, to Valerie, who is a mob boss, who at the very least has a decency and respect to her, and an intelligence, we have Vasquez, who is just plain evil. What's awesome about Vasquez is he is the best kind of pathetic, the well-written kind. One of the things fiction tends to get wrong a lot is it'll have a pathetic character, but they weren't intended to be. The writers wanted them to be strong or powerful or charismatic or liked or whatever, and they're not. They're pathetic. I'm sure you can think of examples of that right off the top of your head. But Vasquez is written to be pathetic. One of the first things we hear about him is he's talking about this big vault deal, and he hears, oh my God, I've got to get $10 million? That's, I can't get that money. $10 million, which is chump change for anybody of any power or note in Hyperion. For a vault key, which is worth literally billions. This is acknowledged in the game. This isn't just me adding the lore of the series to this. They point this out. And yet he is so pathetic that getting this minuscule amount of money is a big deal for him. He literally talks about how he has recited speeches in order to try and come across as more impressive than he is, because he has no natural charisma. He has no idea how to be like Handsome Jack. He wants to be. Of course he does. But unfortunately all he is a wallet head. I just want to gush about Vasquez, because they really, really, really nail this. This is one of the most well-written Krennic characters I've ever seen. I'm reminded, actually, it's going to sound like a strange comparison, I'm reminded of Darth Malak over in KOTOR 1. Now, I know that's going to raise some hackles, but Darth Malak was pathetic. He was stupid and incompetent and bumbled around. The very good writing and acting and presentation salvaged Malak to make him an interesting and engaging character. After all, he was very powerful personally. But, I mean, look at him. I'm going to send some droids. So, similar concept. Although, honestly, Vasquez is a much better written character than Malak, and arguably better performed one as well. Excuse me. I could keep going. You know, there's other characters. There's Shade. August is an interesting one, because August would be a really cool character who I think could honestly join the good guy's side, if not for the fact that he's a creep about Sasha. Like, does he have to, do we have to have that? Is that necessary? Can we just axe that character trait? No? Okay, that sucks. Alright, cool. Felix, you know, unlike Yvette, Felix's betrayal and the fact that it's not a real betrayal feels like it was actually written and designed from the beginning, so his arc actually works quite well. Zero is fantastic, as always. We hear a brief comment from Moxie. I'm trying to think who else there is. I guess that's kind of everyone. What I love most is the game feels significant. This is something I've discovered more and more as I've been analyzing a larger category, broad. I've been casting the net further when it comes to analyzing fiction in the last couple of years. And I feel like it's harder, but more satisfying to pull off a low-tier story. A story in which you're not some big hero and you're not trying to save the world. Now, obviously, they do, cause the destruction of Helios. They kill Jack, and they stop the Traveler. But keep in mind, almost all of that was unintentional. Most of that was just them bumbling into it. In fact, they only defeat the Traveler because it's the only way to save Gordy's. This is a very down-to-earth story, ironically. And I love it for it. I'm not sure I have anything else to add to that one. I do hope, as always, that you have enjoyed. I think I kept my coughing to a minimum, so that's good. I will be seeing you all next time.